I'd like to invite up onto stage Hanna, and we're going to really talk about technology and how it can disrupt today's property portals and PropTech industries. So, Joe, thank you very much for
Thanks,
joining
for having me.
On stage. As a bit of background, I've known Joe for about 15 years. And perhaps you can tell a little bit about your background and your, especially from the technology perspective.
Sure. So I'm a software engineer by trade. Started my life for a small software consultancy firm, and then ended up working at Fairfax Media, which many of you will know as what it is now the Domain Group. Spent about 8.5 years there, and then left, and then met you. And then since then, we've been kind of building, growing, investing in IPOing various startups, including Mature Group, and more recently the PropTech Group.
Okay. And just for clarity, the PropTech Group was sold last week to MRI in the United States. And what did the PropTech Group do?
So the PropTech Group was essentially an agent services enterprise SaaS tool for agencies. And ultimately the philosophy behind the creation of the PropTech Group was an understanding that it's actually difficult. We've heard from Malcolm today, and Jorg's actually doing a good job, but we've been talking about getting closer to transactions at these conferences for, almost 10 years now. And the reality is we know that it's quite difficult for portals to actually inject themselves into the core transaction. And the fundamental reason for that is because once a lead gets sent from a portal to an agent, the portal's blind. And in reality, we're relying on the agent's ability to process those leads. So it occurred to us that, what if we could control agent workflow? What if we could understand and systematically apply the same level of sophistication that is being invested into portals, into the agent workflows and the agent solutions? Ultimately, PropTech Group at its core was a CRM. So we know that everything kind of from a sales point of view ends up in a CRM. And we built an interconnected world or ecosystem of pure play PropTechs, either through build, buy or partner. Build where we had to, buy if we found a good partner on the market that we could afford and decent valuations, and partner where we saw early stage businesses. And the ultimate goal there was to really optimize and streamline and wherever possible automate that workflow. And what was fascinating is our hypothesis was proven to be absolutely correct. I mean, we grew that business significantly through acquisition over 2 years and clearly got to a large market share. So when we built the business, and I should point out that what we did is actually buy some existing CRMs, one from Domain and one from a founders of a new CRM, put them together. When we bought those businesses and IPO'd, about 26% market share by number of real estate agency offices in Australia and New Zealand. And when we sold it, we had about 45% market share. Now that's of the number of agents using our platform. In the terms of properties, we had almost 60% of property transactions go through those platforms. So we had the largest agencies using it. And when you get that data, you almost have almost like a bird's eye view of the market in a way that a portal can never have, in terms of how many phone calls it takes for an agent to get someone to an open for inspection, how many open for inspections per person to buy, all this data which is fascinating and interesting to have, and only available if you have that agency solutions. So PropTech Group at its core solve the problem for agents, make them more efficient through technology. And in doing so, we created a potential threat for portals, which we can touch on a bit further.
Well, let's dive a little bit into this. From your perspective and clearly extensive experience, how has sort of PropTech really impacted the industry to date?
Well, I mean, if you think about investment in technology and technology in general, I mean, the real estate industry has been very slow to adopt. And the term PropTech is only a recent term. I mean, 5-6 years maybe that has the term PropTech actually been used. So most of the investment over the past 25 years, I would say, has gone in fundamentally to portals. And the biggest innovators in technology in real estate industry have been portals, with a clear view of moving people off newspapers and onto the digital world and getting efficiencies in terms of how they serve consumers. But in the past 5 to 7 years, we've seen a significant reallocation of that investment into PropTech. In the last 12 months alone, I think the number is something like $25 or $30 billion invested in pure play PropTechs. And most of those businesses are not serving portals. Most of those businesses are serving either consumers or the agents direct. So we're seeing this massive increase of sophistication in terms of how agents are applying technology to their day-to-day workflow, agents and brokerage businesses. So, as I said, last 12 months, $25 billion being invested in pure play PropTechs. In Australia alone, there are over 500 PropTechs operating today. 80% of those are servicing agents. We should point out Australia has a market of 9,900 agencies, 600,000, between 550 and 600,000 property sales per annum. So to think that there are 500 companies, a lot of them are small, trying to service that market is fascinating to me.
Okay. So when we think about that, with the rise of PropTech, how well is the industry taking on this opportunity? I mean, you've got 500 different companies producing a whole range of innovative products and services, but is the industry adopting it, or is it just washing over them?
It's a really good question, and I guess what we're seeing now is massive fragmentation. And part of the reason why we formed PropTech Group was to converge all those technologies into a platform. So I guess there's always a friction between, particularly in markets like Australia, where you have a dominant REA group, with what the portals are going to do next. How close are they going to get to transaction? Will they adopt commission sharing? Are they going to remove franchise groups, as Jorg just mentioned? These things are what keeps the franchise group, the large brokerage businesses, up at night. The challenge we have is there are a lot of pure play PropTechs that cross over feature set wise. So agents are getting calls literally daily from the next U-Butte startup that's come up and raised some money and saying, I can help you, do this one part and streamline the way that you get people to an open for inspection, for instance. But that feature already exists in another PropTech that they're paying for. We know in Australia, and I'll keep using Australia as an example because that's been where I've spent the most of my time in the last 2 years, an individual agent will spend over $60,000 a year in PropTech, so outside of the portals, and typically subscribe to over 20 to 30 different PropTechs per office. That's phenomenal for me. That's fascinating. If you think about what Salesforce has done with CRM, or even HubSpot, that's one subscription with some modules. That's ultimately what PropTech Group was trying to do, is to say, how do we take all these different PropTechs, which is a lot of noise for agents. They adopt them because they feel they need to, but they don't actually use them. So the challenge is changing behaviour for agents is very difficult. The best way to do that is to make it very simple. I think what Jorg's just told us with QI is proof of that. If you can guide people through a process, they're more likely to stick to that process and use it.
Okay, so we've got an understanding about the level of adoption with the industry. They're trying a lot of things, but probably not getting the most out of them. These things don't even talk to each other.
Correct.
And so it's a bit of a mess. Of course, that creates the opportunity for what Malcolm was talking about and what Georg is doing for tech-enabled brokerages who have said, you know what, I'm taking all of this stuff and being streamlined, understand the process, and have the right technology bolted on the right time. That then has the potential to disrupt the current incumbents.
Correct.
Do you think that will occur?
I think it will happen. I think it is starting to happen. I think the fact that there are 500 PropTechs operating in Australia is evidence that there's an appetite for adoption from these brokerage. We're just not there in terms of interoperability between them and the convergence. To give you an example, Ray White, one of the biggest franchise groups in Australia with about 10% market share, has been investing heavily in their own technology, pure play PropTechs that they ultimately will potentially make available to the broader industry, but are building for their own purposes. And that's not limited to the simple things like workflow automation. They're investing heavily in their own data provider, or basically come up with new deep learning AI models to generate real-time predictions over house prices. If you think of the incumbents, Pricefinder and CoreLogic, they're still using old school statistical models that are 3 months out of date. So with the emergence of AI and deep learning and technology, all of a sudden the barriers to entry for these brokerage businesses, either to invest in themselves or to adopt existing PropTechs, has been removed. And so now it's the largest innovators, in my view, are not the portals anymore. The portals are starting to lag in terms of their ongoing innovation. The largest innovators are pure play PropTechs, servicing agents and agents direct.
Okay, so you started to touch on AI. And we've all heard about Chatgpt. I've been a bit of a fan of Chatgpt over the last few weeks, helping my son write an essay on modernism versus postmodernism filmmaking in Germany, of which I knew nothing and he knew even less. But amazingly, Chatgpt helped us structure a very good essay on this. How can that type of technology really impact the industry? How's it going to change the way we view the world?
It's very interesting, and there's been a hell of a lot of noise around Chat GPT and the adoption in real estate. And I'll break it down into multiple areas. Well, what is it? And there are a couple of presentations later today and tomorrow that will deep dive a little bit further. So I won't spend too much time talking about the tech. But ultimately, what ChatGPT represents for me is a paradigm shift in the adoption of AI, or the adoptability of AI. In the same way that Amazon Web Services meant that we don't need server rooms out in our corporate offices, we can spin up a server within seconds, or Shopify meant that an e-commerce business could be spun up in seconds. What ChatGPT and more generally generative AI models have proven is that we can now build on top of these models. So the really fascinating component is they've proven the ability for us to have conversational generation of AI using rich data in a way that actually makes sense for people. Simon's example of your son's homework is a really great example. I mean, that was deep diving into all this data, or general purpose. The challenge with ChatGPT, in my view now, is it's general information. So it's great if you want to, write a property description and say, generate a property description for this property with these features, and do it in this tone of voice. Do that in seconds, have 4 or 5 different versions. Clearly there's content creation, marketing opportunities, so that's a bit of a no-brainer. The real power for me, though, comes from when domain data gets embedded into those models and you start to do some really cool things. So think of, the best way for me to describe it is I actually tried to do some stuff in AI about 6 years ago, and the barriers were that we needed to build the baseline technology that enabled that conversational component to work. So natural language processing, how do I get a machine to generate words that people understand? Chatbots have never really taken off. They've just been another source of communication. What ChatGPT and generative AI tools do is all of a sudden, with my data, I don't have to worry about whether this tool, this model, can quickly process and find the right data to answer the question, and then generate English version, or a language version that makes sense to respond. So for me, a lot of the heavy lifting an agent does, answering questions from potential vendors, potential buyers, do you think this property is worth it, or how do I do this? All of that can disappear with ChatGPT. The agent can rely on a tool to give real-time instant data that would otherwise take them weeks or hours to dig up through past sales, or how does this property compared to the next. So that's where it really takes hold, and in my view that's where we'll see significant growth in terms of optimization for agents. Those conversations for me happen at agency level. It's very difficult for a portal to get much more value because they don't have those levels of conversations in the same way that agents do.
But could it change the way in which we search? So if you think about all portals today fundamentally look the way they did 20 years ago, okay? Search box, suburb, price range, go, and you're scrolling through the endless listings. Yep. And it would seem to me that there's 2 things. One is I can now start to ask a natural language question. And secondly, it should be learning about what I like. And we talked yesterday about someone who might be interested in like large kitchens because they like to cook. Yep. That then can suddenly change the way in which they think about searching for a property.
You're spot on. I think ultimately it's less around the search and more around tailoring the needs for an individual. Now, if we consider how real estate portals work today, they're very transactional in terms of the nature of usage. I'm looking for this property with these criteria, and there's a walled garden, and you only see the properties and you sort through them. If you look at how agents operate, they're very transactional too. You've come to see this property, I'll show you this property, and maybe I'll show you some others that I have on my list. But that lifetime is very limited. What ChatGPT represents is an opportunity, and generative AI tools, or more broadly AI, represents an opportunity for digital concierge or digital advisory services. So all of a sudden, I can go to an open house, an open for inspection, and a tool could ask, what did you think about this house? We know you've seen other houses. What made this one special? Do you really want it? And pick up these little data points and start progressively profiling people. Once you know what a person's desires are, or they want to live in this suburb, they don't care if it's detached or semi-detached, they prefer detached, and they have this budget. But here are the parameters that they're the things that are most important to them. Once we get to that point, then search becomes somewhat obsolete and irrelevant because it becomes all about matching. Now, I don't think that world's very close or around the corner, but certainly there are segments of an opportunity within that to make far more efficient deals. Now, imagine if a company like PropTech Group, with 50% of every property transaction, was able to build a progressive profile of an individual. Someone enters via a portal. We then track their behaviour across every single real estate agency. We start to progressive profile through these types of AI tools, and then we know that this person is ready, finance approved. We can help them with the finance. I'll come back to that. And then we know there's a property that may come up on the market. We can match that person with an off-market property before there's any need to list. And I think that's the power that's really not being surfaced at the moment that we will see over the next 3 to 5 years.
Okay. Can we bring up the questions so that the audience can participate in the discussion? Okay. And while they're doing that, here we go. You mentioned the threat to portals from CRMs and PropTechs in general. Can you tell us how you see the potential of the threat and how it's going to play out over time?
Yeah, so look, it's a threat and an opportunity, and we've seen even Malcolm was really good at articulating today the opportunity for portals to get closer to transaction, inject themselves in commission sharing. In order to do that, portals and the back-end tools that agencies use need to coexist. They need to interoperate. Right now, there's a disconnect between those tools in many markets. Even with PropTech Group, we get the 50% market share, we still weren't sharing data with the portals. The fundamental threat for portals is if a technology provider is able to service agents and get the same level of penetration as a property portal, then they have the opportunity to displace property portals because they have the agents and they have that side of the marketplace as opposed to the consumers. So for me, I think it's a threat and an opportunity. The way that we sold PropTech Group to agents, and the reason we got to such a large market share, even though everybody was using the same technology stack, was this was a protective tool. This is how you stop a portal from injecting themselves into your transaction. For a franchise group, our pitch was this stops them from making you obsolete and going direct to your agents.
Okay. There's a couple other questions, and they'll come back to a bit more about AI and how you see that's going. From Christoph, what's the business model? Traditional SaaS license or something closer to the transaction happening through your software?
So the core software is SaaS, just like any other business, and it's fair to say CRMs are very sophisticated businesses with very low yields, and they're very different businesses to run than a portal business that's high traffic, consumer facing. And we see multiple examples of this all around the world. Zoopla most recently consolidating their investment into CRMs. Portals don't know how to run CRMs. They're very different businesses, but they're still SaaS. The opportunity for us is around the ancillary transactions. And what we saw in, albeit very early days, was a lot better cut through from an agent-led lead to a mortgage, to an insurance, to a conveyancing, to a utilities connection, than a portal-led lead. And that's ultimately where if we add tools like Chatgpt, all of a sudden, the conversation that is non-core to an agent, a revenue-generating conversation such as, hey, you don't have finance yet, let me help you with finance, could be driven fundamentally entirely through a chatbot and through an AI tool and not require a single human. Those margins are significantly higher. So if we're able to inject ourselves into the ancillary transaction stream, then it becomes really powerful and really profitable.
Let's dig a bit deeper into this AI question. With Chatgpt, we're basically seeing very early days of a technology that is good at scouring the web, good at pulling together generic information or relatively generic information and putting it into well-written sentences. It's not always accurate. I put in, tell me about the history of the REA group, and it came back with quite a few factual errors. But that's just a matter of time, right? And learning and time and then how does it correct itself? Because I had this conversation the other day, like you take something like Wikipedia, right? And it's crowdsourced, we go in there, everyone keeps correcting each other, and hopefully at the end you've got something that looks about right. How does the Chat-GPTs of the world not learn to take on a right-wing or left-wing perspective and be directed there because someone's correcting their history to forget about something else that occurred?
That's a great question. I'm going to answer the question slightly differently than you're expecting. Let's forget the general purpose Chatgpt and focus on domain-specific data.
Yep.
What Chatgpt is uncovered is the harness for training and learning. In order for any AI tool to learn, they have a training set of data. Here are the inputs. these are the outputs I want, but then those outputs are compared with reality. So let's take conveyancing as an example. If we were to subscribe as an enterprise user to Chatgpt, load it in with all the rules for the Australian government, for every state, for every permutation of conveyancing automation, and then got it to go back in time with the data from these billion or 100, 300,000 transactions, generate a contract of sale, for instance. We then compare that with the actual contract of sale generated by a human, and any gaps are then fixed and learnt again. So where it becomes really powerful is for the factual-based generation of data. And I think conveyancing is probably the first thing that it'll be applied to in a strict sense, because there's not a lot of grey.
Okay. So will search ever become image-based as opposed to text-based? The DALL-E E2, which I think is a great product. If you haven't used it, go use it and get a Rembrandt version of made with crayon or something, and it's fantastic, some of the stuff that comes up with. How does it, that converts natural language into drawings. So how do we become image-based search?
I think the challenge with image-based is particularly for search is really, do people want a typical type of house, or are they looking for a house that's close to a certain set of schools or other criteria around the house? I think image being one of the more important factors, but not the sole factor. So I think image as an input, I mean, to be fair, you can actually do image-based searching now. Portals have had that ability turned on and turned off over the years, but taking a photo of a house and saying, find me other houses like this, is something that's been around for a while and something that hasn't really changed with AI. I just don't think it's what users want. I think the reality is however people want to search, whether it's based on drawing a line, a polygon around a map, or based on implied behavioural traits. I've been to these 5 open for inspections. I've submitted digital offers for these 3 properties. Therefore, I may be interested in that. There needs to be multiple ways of searching based on behavioural traits of users.
Okay. A couple other seems to be quite specific questions around CRMs, given your background. Why CRM? There are plenty of SaaS and software needs of realtors. How did you decide to focus on CRM?
The reality is a CRM for real estate is probably the worst term for it. It's far more than a CRM. To apply the same level of sophistication and domain specificity around CRM in Salesforce would cost 4 times as much. So whilst it's a CRM, it's also a trust accounting platform, it's a marketing platform. It's essentially every step from finding a vendor to selling a property and everything in the middle. So they're quite sophisticated end-to-end back office tools for real estate agencies. There are specific areas within the CRM workflow that are substandard or not as good as the pure play PropTechs. So ultimately, think of it as an operating system for a real estate agency where you can plug in Microsoft Office tools, other tools that are very specific and better at doing that one job. Ultimately, with a CRM, it gives you the opportunity to control the workflow of agencies through automation.
Yep. The way I always thought about the CRM was, it's the first thing that the agent checks in the morning when they wake up and get out of bed, and it's the last thing they check before they go to sleep.
Yep.
Right. It's the core bread and butter, the oxygen that runs through the business. Then everything else starts to feed around that, and the REAs and the domains of the world, they're getting their feeds of listings from the CRMs. The CRM is what the agent then uploads stuff into. So that's why I think it makes sense to start there. Why isn't CRM a feature of REA and domain? And what does that why does there an opportunity exist for a third-party provider?
That's a great question. One that we've asked ourselves many times. Ultimately, I think there are two reasons. First of all, in order for a portal to have a CRM, they need to have full market dominance. So potentially REA could do it, given their market dominance, and potentially Rightmove could do it. But in reality, agents have a love-hate relationship with portals. They want leads, but they don't want the portal to know the unit economics of running their business. They don't want portals to have full access to all of their data. So there's a disconnect between seeing the portal as a lead source, a really good lead source, but my business is my business and I want to run it. Remember, we do trust accounting, so we can generate the end-of-year reports for agents. We do all the commissions for agencies, for agents through the agencies. It's a lot of really good data for a portal to have. In fact, we bought my desktop from Domain, who had owned that business for 10 years, and were never able to integrate the two. So it's about data ownership, I think, is fundamentally the core reason why the two don't come together.
Yeah. I think the other reason why portals sort of don't like them, and I'm talking with a company in Brazil at the moment that does have a CRM. That's a sales CRM, yeah. And is that the margins and the economics are so fundamentally different. I mean, at the PropTech Group, you get to 20 or 30% EBITDA margin, and you're incredibly happy. Portals are thinking 50, 60. Yeah, right move 70 plus.
Yep.
So the economics are different. And secondly, when you're a portal and you're trying to get on 10, 20, 30 million extra revenues, if not more, it's easier just to move the pricing lever and extract the value. The problem is that as much as an agent will pay to advertise a listing around the world, they will never pay the same amount of money for a bit of technology that is actually critical to the future of their business. Okay? And I think a lot of the CRM guys have done themselves a disservice over the years by not pulling the pricing lever hard enough, because the CRM systems are just as sticky
They are.
as the portals.
9-year average tenure for us at PropTech. So once it's in, it's in.
Okay, now there's another question here before we wrap up: is what's the next big Chatgpt?
Oh, look, I don't think there'll be another big Chatgpt. I think it'll be around derivatives of the core technology, derivatives of the. I'm sorry, my voice is going. Derivatives of the learning models. So it's probably something that's not generative in conversation, I think would be the answer.
Okay, so it's about taking the underlying. So the step forward is that although AI has been around for quite a while and people have been using it for different applications, but it's always been hidden. ChatGPT has just made it open in everyone's face with a simple to use front end on the front of it, and everyone's gone out there and are using it.
And I can build stuff on top of it now.
Yeah, and so now you've then unleashed the beast, so to speak, and you've made it mainstream, and people have now realized the power of this, and now there's all the technology. And I think we were talking the other day, and I think Scott, it might be someone you know, has built some technology for universities so that universities can work out whether this piece of work submitted by a student has even had ChatGPT or been ChatGPT'd, I guess will be the word, in that process, so they can start to ping the student for not doing the work at the end of the day. Joe, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, and not only about the PropTech Group and CRMs, and et cetera, but also about AI and generative AI and so on, where that's all going. We've got a bunch of other presentations over the course of the next day and a half where people will be talking about the use of generative AI, et cetera. In fact, in the next session after the break, which we're having now, we've got a bunch of discussions around technology into itself, and we'll be starting off with Scott Holmes from the REA Group back in 45 minutes, which is whatever it works out to be, about 10 past or 20 past the hour. So thank you, everyone. I hope that first session was interesting for you, and I look forward to seeing you back here in about 45 minutes. Please be on time. Please be on time. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Tom.